All right, so what's up, everybody? Thanks for clicking this video. Thanks for tuning into my channel. My name is Simon Hill, Black American from Louisiana, coming to you live from Budapest, Hungary. The date is July 19th, 2024, and the time is about 1:18 p.m. where I'm at right now. And this is part 6 of us reading Is the Turk a White Man, written by Murat Ergin, published in 2018. I suggest everybody go pick up this book on Amazon for the humble price of only $30. And we are in the middle of, I believe, chapter 3 or 4. No, we're in the middle of chapter 4, and it's been a while since I've read because I've been hella busy. I've been very busy working here in Budapest. As you know, I'm an English teacher. I had a job this past week working at a summer camp for kids, and that took a lot of time. Like, I was waking up at 6 a.m. and not going to sleep at around, I was going to sleep like maybe 12 a.m. the next day, right? Like, barely sleeping, always working, grinding it out. And I didn't have time to go live, do any movie reviews, make independent videos, any of that. But I do have some more content coming from people. But I also want to continue my book react series, want to continue my movie review series. I want to continue writing and publishing my treaties on different topics and things like that. So, this past week working at a school, having to get up, hop on the train for an hour, come back home with an hour-long commute, all that sort of stuff. Like, it made me appreciate the time that I am able to save by working from home, and how productive I am on getting my passion projects done. And to anybody who has to go to work every day, I feel you for real, because it's not easy. You come home and the last thing you want to do is work on other things that you really might enjoy, because you're just so goddamn tired and you want to preserve your energy for the next day. But I'm going to be working much, much harder on my personal projects, because I want to make myself successful and not other people successful. I support everybody else's dreams, but I want to chase my own dreams. And my dream is to be an intellectual, is to be a professor, is to be a thought leader, is to be a thought provoker, and a person who is constantly on the journey of learning. So, what we're going to do, we're just going to run through chapter 4, finishing chapter 4, race in early Republican Turkey. If I remember right, in this chapter, he was talking about many of the intellectuals in Turkey during the time of the Republican Reform or Republican Revolution at the end of the Ottoman Empire, in the middle, or the early beginnings of the 20th century, and how they were trying to center their nation. What type of nationalism would they have? Would it be an Ottoman-style nationalism of multi-ethnicities and multi-languages? Would it be an Islamic nationalism centered around, basically Islam as the unifying force of the nation? Or would it be a Turkish style of nationalism? They sort of selected the Turkish form of nationalism, and then because of the age of colonialism and the effects of white supremacy at that time, many of the Turks were hell bent on trying to prove that they were white, and that's what a lot of their intellectuals were doing. They had some guys who actually came from white Europe to move to Turkey, and then they integrated into society, and they started speaking up on Turkish history, the Ottoman history, and all that sort of stuff, and said, yeah, the Turks were always the most modern, always the most advanced, always the most civilized, that sort of stuff. Continuing here. So, anthropometric mobilization to quote unquote discover the Turkish race, a watershed moment that illustrates the rise of an anthropometric search for racial essences, takes place in the first Turkish Congress of history, Turk Tarih Kongresi, preceding a Congress of language only with a few months. Language and history were assigned to separate congresses, but they both were intended to settle the direction of the new republic's anthropometric fascination with origins. The year is 1932, the early stages of building a Turco-centric history with timeless roots in an ancient past, a general idea about manufacturing a new history that sidesteps Turkey's Islamic imperial heritage exists, and an official society for the study of Turkish history was established 2 years ago, but the exact direction of the endeavors remains uncertain. These congresses were possibly the first and last public venues to openly discuss the new ideological mobilization in front of a large audience. The conference is intended as a gathering of high school teachers. In the conference proceedings, 196 high school teachers are duly listed as participants. An anonymous preface to the conference proceedings mentions the 4-volume history published recently by the Society of History, and explains that the conference aims to create a unity of ideas and goals by reaching those who are expected to teach history textbooks. 18 professors of the University of Istanbul, known as the Darul Funun, then are also in attendance. There are indications that the university's reluctant efforts to support the regime in celebrating the new direction of scholarship disturbed the Republican modernizers. In fact, in just a few years, the government will undertake a major reform of the university, dismissing a large number of professors, some of whom are present in the audience. I will discuss the implications of the university reform in the next chapter. The conference appears to be an attempt to popularize the new historiography of the Republic beyond the small circle of the elite that was involved in its production until then. The intention is to let flow of information move from the members of the official historical society to teachers who, in turn, will disseminate this knowledge to even larger social strata through education. In the meantime, the presence of professors gives a much needed scholarly authority to fresh and peculiarly outlandish theories. An overwhelming majority of the presentations strive to establish the ancientness and greatness of the Turkish race, history, and civilization. Others deal with particular historical topics, such as Ottoman history, and broader issues, such as historical methodology. Being the first attempt of its type, there is some uncertainty as to what direction the agenda would take. But in his opening speech, the Minister of National Education, Mahmoud Esat Bozkurt, forcefully sets the tone. Bozkurt, a rather extreme representative of the rising racial concerns with Turkishness, lists two reasons for the Congress in his speech. A, to learn the roots of Turkish civilization. B, to show that books written by Westerners did not represent these Turkish roots, quote unquote, properly. After outlining the premises of historical scholarship endorsed by the government and complaining about misrepresentations, the minister summarizes the historical reasoning of the new paradigm. Turks in their homeland of Central Asia ended the Stone Age in 12,000 BC, although Europeans could escape from that age only 5,000 years later. While humans were still living in trees and caves in other parts of the world, Turks in Central Asia created a civilization of wood and metal. Climatic changes forced them to migrate westward. Therefore, Turks who advanced agriculture and animal husbandry and discovered gold, copper, tin, and iron in 7000 BC spread the first civilization in their wanderings after they left Central Asia and thus established the essences of Chinese and Indian civilizations in Asia, Hittite civilization in their blessed land Anatolia, Sumerian and Elamite civilizations in Mesopotamia, and finally the Egyptian, Mediterranean, and Roman civilizations. They saved Europe, whose high civilization we value and follow today, from cave life in those days. This was written by that guy Madoff. No, written by the guy Boskurt. All right. So, all the lectures in the conference include worshipful praise for Ataturk, crediting him for authorship of the so called New Turkish History. Considering the fact that Ataturk is himself among the audience, scientific presenters want to tap into his charisma to bolster the credibility of their claims. Afet Inan, Ataturk's adopted daughter, appears to be one of the most dominant persons in the Congress, despite her young age then, 24, and absence of scholarly credentials. She comes to the stage following the minister's opening speech, effectively becoming the champion of blending scientific and nationalist arguments for promoting anthropometric claims. She first tries to establish the racial purity of Turks. The autonomous the autochthonous people of the Central Asian plateaus emerged as the combination of a single race because, due to natural obstacles at the borders of their homeland, no other people from a different blood and type could come and mix with them for tens of thousands of years. Adding that these people should be called Turks because of their language, Inan describes them in the following way. The obvious characteristics of this Central Asian race is brachycephalic. Its corporeal formation, despite fabricated legends, is proportional, and its skin has no relationship with the color of yellow. It is mainly and generally white. I believe that this is the newest and most essential scientific criterion for considering the belonging of a group of humans to a race. This was said by Ataturk's adopted daughter. The Turks were always white, they're not the yellow man. Inan then presents a map of internal seas in Central Asia, which she assumes had disappeared as a result of drought and forced Turks to migrate to other parts of the world, spreading their advanced civilizations in the meantime. The map exemplifies the nature of extreme self confidence built on thin scientific evidence. Inan's presentation incorporates a number of key elements we will observe in racial mobilization of the period: a belief in a pure Turkish race, an emphasis on whiteness in its descriptive characteristics, and a suspicious attitude toward the fabricated legends of Western scholars, while at the same time maintaining a stubborn insistence on scientific rationality. When she steps off the podium, it must be clear to everyone that challenging Inan is tantamount to challenging Ataturk. Two scholars try to do just that, in different styles and with different consequences. They both address the issue of scientific evidence. The first, Fuat Koprulu, is an Ottoman historian and professor at the Darülfünun. He will be one of the founders of the Democratic Party, which will defeat the ruling Republican People's Party in an open election and end the single party regime in 1950. Koprulu comes to the stage right after Inan to express concerns about her presentation, cautioning that evidence regarding ancient civilizations in Central Asia was relatively new and required more time to conduct a full analysis. For his comments, see this book. Koprulu had a history of cold shouldering outlandish theories about the origins of Turks. 2 years ago in 1930, when Korpulu unsuccessfully ran for the presidency of the Darülfünun, he criticized one of his opponents, Yusuf Zia, in the following way. Yusuf Zia Bey can suggest any theory that he wants outside the Darülfünun. He could say that the prophet Adam was a Turk, that there were Turkish cells in the blood of Egyptian pharaohs, and that the Sphinx was built by a Turkish architect. But he cannot represent the scientific personality of the Darülfünun. This was said by this guy. This guy whose name was Corporalu. Corporalu is like the guy who's like, guys, let's be reasonable here. Mohammed Rakib said, hello, bro. Hello, Mohammed. Assalamu alaikum to you. And shout out to everybody who's going to tune into this live stream as we read this book. So, continuing here. Although it is hard to gauge the impact of Corporalu's past position, it possibly does not help that Yusuf Zia is a respected supporter of Turco-centric historical theories. However, Corporalu's critical comments at the Congress are conceding and apologetic. In fact, he begins by downgrading his scientific authority. Dear colleagues, neither prehistory nor protohistory are fields in which I am engaged. However, following Afet Hanim's valuable presentation, I could not help but present my thoughts on some general issues to the critical view of your great assembly. Corporalu limits his remarks mainly to methodological issues, maintaining that studies and findings on prehistory are limited and far from conclusive. He also dwells on the name Turk and its origins in ancient Chinese sources. In the second part of his comments, Corporalu explicitly criticizes Western race theories of the period, specifically targeting Arthur de Gobineau, born in 1816 and died in 1882. Arthur wrote a book titled An Essay on the Inequality of Races. It had already become a central piece of pseudo-scientific studies on race. Calling de Gobineau a civil servant in French foreign affairs, Corporalu opposes the attempts to create an Indo-European race and asserts that race and language should not be conflated. Connecting recent racial conceptions to European imperialism, Corporalu continues, however, it is not possible to maintain this type of race concept today, thanks to the progress of anthropology on one hand and the social sciences on the other. The true and scientific meaning of the race concept has been decided. Nevertheless, we frequently see that the efforts of Indo-Europeanism, in other words, the love of Aryanism, still continues among some authors and historians. All right, Mohammed Waqib said, Walaikum salam. Shout out to you. Walaikum salam to you too. Sam Seals says, salute Simon. Shout out to Sam Seals as well. We are trying to wrap up and finish this book written by Murat Ergin, Is the Turk a White Man? Hopefully we can finish it this weekend. I might go live again later today after my English classes to do another hour or two of reading. But continuing here, we're in the part of the book where he's talking about there was a Turkish Congress where the Republican reformers were basically bringing together all the intellectuals and Ataturk himself. And basically, they were trying to rewrite Turkish history to make Turks seem like they always existed. And on top of that, that they influenced or were the bedrock of many of the civilizations of the ancient past. They were using pseudoscience. They were just using race theory to come up with this idea that the Turks were always in Anatolia. They were always present in Sumeria. They were present in Egypt as well. They were present in Europe, and that they were the catalyst for European civilization to reach its height in zenith. And then Ataturk's adopted daughter, her name was Anu or Inonu, something like that, right? She was insistent on pushing the narrative that Turks were white, that they were white people. They were not the yellow man. They were not the Chinese. They're not like the Koreans, whatever. They are white. And because of their whiteness as well, she also correlates the two. Because of their whiteness, that's also why they were so quick to modernize. That's why they were so quick to leave the Stone Age and that sort of stuff, right? Now, we all know all of this is BS. It's all false. It's not real. Whiteness does not correlate to intelligence. Whiteness does not correlate to a higher level of civilization. But this is how science was run back in those times. They thought, really, yes, if you were of a lighter complexion, that means that your brain worked better than other people's. As we know, this is not true. Coffee break, cold coffee. All right. So Sam Seal says, I know a girl that was related to Ataturk. All right. Well, shout out to her wherever she is. Ataturk has an interesting history because he never had any kids of his own, just like George Washington. And there are so many overlaps when it comes to the Turkish nationalism and American nationalism, and also Turkish culture and American culture. There are so many overlapping things in their culture with ours. Continuing here. Although Korpelu frames his anti-Aryan stance in a way that supports some of Inan's arguments in the rest of his talk, it would not be far-fetched to think that his comments on race must have nailed his coffin shut. Following another comment and the lunch break, Afet Inan briefly speaks before the scheduled presentation in the afternoon session, targeting Korpelu and ending with a comment about the source of the term Turk. Obviously, the Chinese cannot be the name givers of Turks. The Turks never needed to be baptized by another nation to get their names. Inan's harsh comments forces Korpelu to come to the stage during the break and without even waiting for the end of the scheduled presentation. In a brief statement, he explains that he completely agrees with Inan and that the exchange of words is a matter of misunderstanding rather than a disagreement. When a member of the Society of Hassan Cemil blames Korpelu again for undervaluing scientific evidence that was in favor of Turks. Korpelu once again apologizes, blames misunderstandings, and declares his complete agreement with the critics. So there's a sort of like group thing, mob thing that's happening here, right? Where these Turkish intellectuals are like, you know, the Turks have always been an outstanding people. They never wanted or needed help from another civilization. They could always do it on their own and that sort of stuff. And then this guy Korpelu is like, all right, guys, let's be serious. Like, our name, the Turks, probably comes from the Chinese. We did not exist in Egypt. We were not here in Anatolia that long to influence the civilizations. And then they basically just like bully him into agreeing with their pseudoscience, right? This is a common thing that happens in a lot of spaces and places, and unfortunately, that needs to stop, right? We don't need to bully people to agree with our points of view. All right, continuing here, but the saga is not yet over with this apology. Hassan Cemil, a member not only of the newly established Society for the Study of Turkish History, but also, and not unusually, of the military political elite, asked for permission to speak. Engaging in a rebuttal of a rebuttal, Hassan Cemil reminds Korpelu that his original comments were not only limited to the historical name given to Turks. Against Korpelu's previous remarks that no one should rush to judgments using recently uncovered evidence and newly conceptualized methods, Hassan Cemil retorts, under the applause of the audience, our contention is to modify, based on new documents, European scientists' conclusions about the origins and flows of humans and civilization, which rely upon dated information and inferences. The value of the documents we presented as evidence were not discussed and disproved by Honorable Professor Fuad Bey. Now, let's touch upon the insufficiency of documents, or using the professor's own expressions, the idea that these new sciences are only children. They are new sciences. I would like to remind you, with the permission of the Honorable Professor, that when new truths are established at every stage of sciences, these truths can be considered as children. The real accomplishment is to be able to pay attention to the value, not the seniority, of the newly born truth. We rely on the most recent discoveries about the nature of Turkish civilization and Turkish origins. My dear colleagues, we are treading on new and invisible roads, constructing a scientific building which cannot be demolished so easily because its foundation are the methods and evidence of science. Interesting, interesting, interesting. You know what's crazy about this whole situation, right? Basically, these Turkish people are doing pseudoscience in a response to the pseudoscience that the Europeans were doing about them. The Europeans were writing books saying that the Turks were savages, that they're backwards, that they're, monsters and all this sort of stuff. And then the Turks are trying to reply that no, we've been an honorable people, we've been a civilization building people, and they're using that to then do pseudoscience. And like we as black people, like as black Americans, we've been guilty of this too, right? Like the white man demonized us for years, saying that we're animals, that we're savages swinging from trees in Africa and all that sort of stuff. And then we reply with a lot of extremes saying, no, we were all kings, we were all queens, we all had great glorious civilizations, we all came from places where they discovered the battery and modern electricity before the Europeans even stepped foot on the earth. Like we go to those extremes. Now, I do agree that science has proven that black people were the original people on the planet Earth. But think about this, like we could not all have been kings. We could not all have been queens. Not every African civilization was a just, morally right, prosperous civilization for everybody involved. It doesn't make sense. That doesn't make sense. Like, but this sort of reaction to being denigrated is sort of like a natural human reaction. And that's what I'm understanding what the Turks were doing in this case. Going to the comments here, Sam Steele says, it talks about he says, have you seen the show Dirilis Ertugrul? It talks about the Turks' history before going to Anatolia and how they split off from common ancestors from Mongolians. Oh, I've heard about Ertugrul, right? It's like Game of Thrones for Turkey and stuff like that. I'm not really like interested in those type of shows. Neither is my wife. She doesn't like those type of shows either. Maybe I'll watch it. Maybe we could review it. But the thing is, like, that show Ertugrul was like heavily funded by the Turkish government to give that sort of like perception. And once again, one of the major overlaps of Turkish nationalism and American nationalism is that they both love and applaud the hero, especially when that hero is supposed to represent the nation and the religion of that nation, or the predominant religion of that nation as well. And Ertugrul does a lot of those same things, like, builds up these characters, these people, these historical figures as representers and arbiters of protectors of the faith and protectors of the nation, right? It's one of those overlapping things that seems to be consistent in Turkish media, right? Continuing here, the image Hassan Cemil depicts of an old dogma under attack by a stream of fresh evidence assigns the ownership of scientific discourse to the new understanding of history. It is clear that anyone opposing the new theories of Turkish origins will be shunned not only as traitors, but also as bad scientists. The hidden references to age and seniority, as well as the metaphoric uses of childhood to refer to novel scientific knowledge, appears to attempt to diffuse the immense age and career differences between Korpulu and Inan. The status and expertise of the former is successfully reduced to the rants of an old man, much to his chagrin. Sensing the imminent danger, Fuat Korpulu comes back to the stage without delay. He once more becomes the conceder. Dear colleagues, Hassan Cemil Bey's speech shows me the chain of misunderstandings has not yet come to an end. Therefore, I thank him for giving me the opportunity to end it. I have already said that I agree with what Afet Hanin told us. I also agree with Cemil Bey's ideas. However, it appears that there is a point of misunderstanding. All right. The rest of the brief speech discusses some of these misunderstandings about historical documents and scientific methods. Fuat's Korpulu ends by stating his explanation of misunderstandings and his hope that Cemil Bey is convinced with these explanations. The Korpulu incident comes to an end with this concession. On the second day, a new debate breaks out, showing that those who do not have Korpulu's adaptive capacities will not keep their positions for long. The day begins with a long presentation entitled A General Look at the History of Turkish Race and Civilization. The author, Reşit Galip, is a member of the New Historical Society. In 1 year, he is going to be appointed as the Minister of Education and become one of the main architects of the replacement of the Ottoman Darul Funun with a more regime-friendly university. In the afternoon, Zeki Velidi Togan comes to the stage, a Turkic emigre scholar who was critical of the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia. Togan lived in Turkey since 1924 and started to teach in the Darul Funun in 1927. In a long and mainly technical speech, he first discusses his objections to the existence of a prehistoric drought that forced migrations out of Central Asia. One of the major themes in the new racial and historical research, Togan presents the opinions of a certain Ariel Stein as evidence of the non existence of a prehistoric drought. The trouble is that the source of the information is a private tea party with Stein. The day ends with Reshit Galip's response to Togan's objections. Both of them keep the debate within civilized standards, although an undercurrent of accusation concerning each other's ignorance of certain authors and sources dominates the discussion. Reshit Galip does not miss the opportunity to ridicule Togan's attempt to use a tea party as evidence. In the afternoon of the sixth day, Togan voices his objections about the hidden cities of ancient Turks that were putatively covered under the sands of Central Asia. Trying to take revenge for Reshit Galip's sarcastic tea party comments a few days earlier, Togan brings up the issue again, but this attempt backfires. In the increasingly tense room, Togan takes on the role of a pseudo-scientific traitor. Reshit Galip appears at the stage for rebuttal and ends with a final and devastating blow to Togan's scholarly credibility, to the accompaniment of strong and continuous applause from the audience, simultaneously undermining the authority of the old university that he would go on to dismiss a year later. Dear friends, I am very thankful for not being a student in front of Zeki Validi's lectern at the Darul Funun. We can never allow our children, whom we cherish and are readying for great works of the nation, to have their heads spoiled and reasoning injured with these methods that are completely incorrect and devoid of even the most primitive essence of calculation and logic. The Darul Funun lectern of the Republic of Turkey is not such an invaluable position to be occupied with superficial information and ugly methods. Another Turkic emigre scholar, Sadri Maksudi, continues the assault on Togan's credibility and scholarship. All of Zeki Veli Bey's claims in this matter are wrong. His criticism depends on wrong sources and rootless evidence. It is obvious that all these criticisms pursue a goal that other than serving the illumination of a scientific matter. So basically, all of the other Turkish intellectuals are saying, like, this guy Togan, he is incorrect because, his source of information was sitting down with a reputable historian, but only getting the information over a cup of tea, right? And so the other people are saying this guy, he can't be taken seriously, which to some degree you can't, say, hey guys, I heard over a cup of tea that, the Turks really didn't migrate from Asia because of a drought or because of some massive flood or something like that, right? Like that is one thing, but they're just saying you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong, instead of putting up counter evidence or putting up their own evidence to actually dispute the claim of the scientists who said this thing. So continuing here, Shemseddin Gunalte, another member of the Historical Association and the powerful and the political elite, follows Arsal on the stage, countering Zeki Validi's criticism with a rhetoric increasing in nationalistic intensity. Gulante raises the specter of a Congress held 15 years ago in Russia, arguing that Zeki Validi had opposed the universal unity of the Turks in that Congress as well. In that Congress, Zeki Validi Bey had opposed the formation of Turkic unity and separated the Bashkir from the Turks. Voices of shame on him are heard in the crowd. I wonder if he wants to play the same role in this Congress, but let him be sure that flames of nationalism erupt from the minds of those who attend the Congress. Every effort, every attempt against these flames is bound to melt. By that point, even if he wanted to do it, it was too late for Togan to come back to the stage and blame everything on misunderstandings. With both his scientific and nationalistic personality under suspicion, Zeki Validi resigns from his post at the university without even waiting for the end of the conference. And he had to leave Turkey despite vehement protests from his students. He could return to the university only in 1939 after writing a letter praising Ataturk. Although there were others, more minor debates in the Congress. These two incidents were formative in becoming examples for the fate of dissenters. The discursive authority of the search for the Turks' racial roots was so great that any opposition had to tread a fine line, relying on an extremely cautious and apologetic tone. Remarks that were considered to question the premises of the new historical thesis had to face incessant accusations for ignoring national and scientific realities. A final example of this trend would be Muzafer Sherif, one of the founders of social psychology. Born and raised in Turkey, Sharif was sent by the government to receive his PhD in the United States. He started to teach at Ankara University in 1939 and published in 1943 The Psychology of Race, a critique of racism and prominent Turkish theories of the period. After facing prosecution with charges of communism, he had to leave Turkey to pursue a career in the U.S. and become one of the major figures in psychology. I'm a suggest that my wife look up this person, Muzafer Sharif. Muzafer Sharif. Everybody should look him up because he seems like somebody that we should read later. Very, very dope. Very dope that this Turkish man went to the U.S., to study to get his PhD, funded by the government, came back, got educated, and was like, hey, the way y'all talk about race and history here in Turkey, it's actually kind of backwards. It's not the way it should be done. And then they say, oh, wow, we just paid for a communist to come back into our country. And then they ran him out the country. But very interesting, very interesting. I want to read this book more in depth. Yeah, Muzafer Sharif. Muzafer Sharif. So the problem dissenters faced had to do with high stakes associated with anthropometric efforts to establish the ancientness and whiteness of Turks. Once the links between national modernization and racial essences were made, the discursive appeal of even the most absurd ideas became immense. Thinking of such a radical rewriting of history may perhaps remind one of the quip, God can change the future, but only the Tsar can change the past. Ah, that's funny. Attributed to the French aristocrat Marquis de Custine with regards to Tsarist Russia. Indeed, Turkish Republican reformers had great amounts of optimism regarding the speed and extent of social transformation. The Ottomans had a conception of quote-unquote society, which it consisted of a combination of local affairs, divine intervention, and a rather distant sultanic authority. The Republican fascination with Western science and knowledge resulted in the idea that elite intervention could transform and mold society through education. A firm belief in the power of the state led to the emergence of social engineering as a viable solution for social problems. A naive sense of optimism emphasized the essential capabilities of Turkish people that could putatively accomplish. Under correct scrutiny and tutelage, the most difficult feats. The Republican historiography was perhaps the most central force in the search for transforming society and creating a new identity. This is why it's so important. This is why it's so important that kids are taught history in school, national history, the history of the region where they are, world history, everything like that. And this is why it's such a shame right now that in America, many conservative Republicans and some black people who support this are fighting against critical race theory being taught in schools. Even though critical race theory is not being taught in schools, but they're using the phrase critical race theory to attack anybody who wants to teach true American history about what happened to black people, what happened to Native Americans, how women were treated in American society, and how we have progressed and moved forward. But they don't even want to teach that. I'm pretty sure if you have kids living in America right now, when your kids have kids, they won't even learn about Martin Luther King. That's the direction America is going. And this is the thing. In Turkey, when they were creating their new society after the Ottomans fell apart, the Republicans were like, we have to control history. We have to tell a narrative of history, a story of our nation that is compelling, that is moving, and backs up our claims of being modern and white. Because we need to be white to be seen as modern, and we need to be modern to be seen as white. Those two things needed to work in tandem. And that's how they were trying to move the society forward. So the whiteness of the Turks was created. I know some people might be tired of getting the notification on their phone. Oh, he's asking the same question. He still don't know the answer. Are Turkish people white? The point is, I know people are going to Google that. This YouTube channel or this YouTube series is SEO friendly. I want to get clicks, likes, and attention, of course. So the thing is, people are going to type in forever until the end of time, are Turkish people white? And so hopefully, fingers crossed, somebody will actually sit down and listen to the entire book. read the entire book and go through the entire story about how the Republican Turks at the end of the Ottoman Empire tried to create a white Turkish identity. And I believe later on in this book, we're going to talk about Turks who moved to America and other parts of the world trying to claim whiteness legally, which was a Supreme Court case where a Turkish man said, "Hey, I'm white in Jim Crow America. Please, please count me as white because I can't live with the Negroes." You get what I'm saying? All right, continuing here. Sam Seals jumped in the comments. He says, "What's crazy? Some Turks are darker than me, and I'm not talking about the Afro Turks either." Facts. Facts. There are a lot of dark skinned people in Turkey. Turkey is a nation with, with a variety of shades. I would say they go from white, blonde hair, blue eyes, white, to like tan brown, like very dark Arab brown, right? You get what I'm saying? But even still, whiteness is not about skin color. Because if whiteness was about skin color, the Italians, the dark skinned Sicilians, the dark skinned Greeks, stuff like that, they wouldn't be counted as white. They wouldn't be counted as white. Whiteness is a social construct. It's not real. Race is not real. And yeah, it's a that's the point that we're trying to get at here. Continuing here in the story. So, teaching people their own greatness required building a base of educated supporters committed to the regime. This core group, consisting of scholars, intellectuals, academics, teachers, government bureaucrats, and army officers, was then expected to spread the anthropometric, biometric, and other significant messages to the larger population. This Republican ideal of information flowing freely in a system of concentric circles is, of course, far from perfect. Not surprisingly, the process of enlightening the people did not go unchallenged, since alternative discourses were able to carve marginal spaces despite the overwhelming power of the state sponsored dissemination. Resistance to the regime took place at the local level. Moreover, the intended information was not only diluted but also transformed as it moved from the elites to the outside layers of the circles. Intellectual and academic issues at the level of conferences and scholarly publications reached people in the form of slogans in, for example, elementary schools, newspapers, or the military. However, there are indications that the core messages from the elites had successfully reached their intended audiences in only a few decades. Research conducted in the 1950s and 60s indicates the attachment to nationalistic ideals, belief in Turkishness as a distinct category with its unique characteristics, and the cult of Ataturk were well established among the peasants, high school students, and university students. The Republican modernizers hosted a romantic yearning for the essential and pure qualities of the folk, together with a positivist distrust of people's current conditions. On one hand, anthropometric claims sought the timeless superiority of ordinary Turks, especially peasants, who protected themselves against the contaminating effects of modernity. This usually entailed envisioning connections between ancient civilizations and contemporary inhabitants of Turkey that supposedly stayed intact and maintained their purity across time and space. On the other hand, a positivist emphasis on negative current conditions that stem from, to use a common centuries of neglect, counterbalanced the romantic conceptions of Turks. The second stream involved a heavy emphasis on enlightenment and the need to educate people in order to remove them from their current state of ignorance and deliver them to a state of scientific knowledge. In this sense, romantic myths and positivist mistrust functioned cooperatively because they both justified the existence of the elite, the former to discover and appreciate hidden ancient truths about essential qualities, and the latter to teach people about their essential talents and fix their current situation. Combining these two currents in the machinery of a state sponsored mobilization led to the dissemination of anthropometric and biometric knowledge as the inevitable scientific truth. The government support for anthropometric scholarship was even more pronounced than that for biometrics. As with biometrics, the anthropometric research was generated not by a few crazy scientists who were acting on their own, but by a group of scholars who were clearly aware of the significance of the project of Republican modernization. Moreover, beyond the scientific circles, there was great interest in the findings of the new Turco-centric race sciences. The following passages from the memoirs of one of Ataturk's personal servants is an interesting testimony on how race science turned into an entertaining curiosity. After the hat reform, the fez, Ottoman headgear, was put aside and everyone had started to wear hats. Wearing a hat had revealed the head measurements of those who would wear them. We are in Ankara in 1930. Dr. Reshit Gallup is measuring the size of everyone's skull with a machine in his hand, dolichocephalic or brachiocephalic. In other words, animal or human, as we, the servants, would say. As far as I remember, heads that vary between 77 and 79 were dolichocephalic, and those larger than 81 were Fordman brachiocephalic. Ataturk's head was measured, and it turned out to be 81. Everyone in the room is in line waiting for their heads to be measured. Think about that. That's crazy. So let's think about this. Let's break this down. Once again, this is Book React. I am not a scientist yet. I'm going to school for sociology, but from my understanding of this book, anthropometric scholarship is like studying the history of the Turkish people. Biometric scholarship is like the measuring of noses, skull sizes, and all that sort of race science that people used to do 100 years ago, where they said, yeah, we can determine how smart you'll be by the bridge of your nose, or we'll know how likely you are to steal by how far your eyes are apart and stuff like that. So yeah, they were measuring skulls, and they were saying like, yeah, we can tell how smart people are by measuring their skull. And if your skull size was 81, you were a human, or you were at least classified as human. But if you had less than 81, like an 80 or something like that, then you would be considered an animal. And Ataturk had his skull measured and he was 81. Interesting that you would even participate in that. Why would you even participate in that? Unless you believed in race science to some degree. All right. The accuracy of the memoir cannot be known. However, we can use it as a springboard to make a number of observations regarding the character of the anthropometric project. First and most apparently, Republican modernizers showed great interest in the prevalent race science of the period. Beyond this personal snippet that cannot be independently corroborated, the large number of both scholarly and popular conferences and publications in those years offer us a great deal of evidence for the government's direct support for the new scholarly mobilization. Second, the symbolic correspondence between the sizes of hats and heads in the excerpt was not a mere coincidence. The links between the anthropometric and material manifestations of modernity, in fact, assembled the very basis of the Republican taxonomic discourse. While the material manifestations of modernity symbolized by hats in the text required great effort, it was considered even more important to establish a more robust foundation that attested to the Turks' racial ability to modernize, characterized by skulls in the text. Third, knowledge production always required reinterpretation during dissemination. An apparent inconsistency existed between the esoteric and anthropometric knowledge produced among the scholars and the form in which it was disseminated to the public. This inconsistency is seen in the way in which the servant labels daciocephalic and brachiocephalic skulls as animal and human, rather than demonstrating a form of distortion, reveals, on the contrary, a systemic feature of the taxonomic discourse, carefully filtering scientific claims and disseminating only the most useful parts. Fourth, despite the claims of scientific infallibility, the Republican anthropometric mobilization does not appear to be rigorous, even for the standards of the 1930s. In an age when cephalometric measurements were either being done with more meticulous methods, such as filling old skulls with lead shots, or were completely discarded for the sake of less overtly racist measurements, such as intelligence scores, the Republican scientists were still fascinated by crude methods of measurement. More advanced techniques that presented differences as instances of shades of degree rather than of clear-cut certainty could certainly undermine the basic premises of the Republican taxonomic discourse. Although the peculiar historiography of the 1930s may seem to have materialized into being in the span of only a few years, the trickling of racial thinking into nationalist history began in the late Ottoman period. This Ottoman foundation is perhaps part of the reason why seemingly outlandish claims appeared convincingly scientific. These early attempts were religious or dynastic identity claims, but they provided a basis for Republican thinking about history and language. By the 1930s, the importance of learning about the past as a patriotic duty was firmly ensconced. Knowing history acquired such a mythical status that innumerable accounts glorifying Ataturk traced his leadership skills to historical knowledge knowledge. Wow. The paradigm shift in the construction of Turkishness corresponds to the end of the 1920s when the Kemalist regime had virtually eliminated all political opposition and felt confident enough to pursue a cultural agenda that linked race and modernity using tools already established in Ottoman modernization, but with a greater speed and vigor. The core group initiating the process consisted mainly of the members of the ruling elite, which indicates the importance assigned to the project. The modernizers were directly involved in the act of rewriting history rather than commissioning professional historians and allowing scholarly considerations to determine the course of new history. In addition, influential historians who contributed to scholarly mobilization, such as Yusuf Akçura, Afet İnan, Reşit Galip, and Necip Asim Yazikis, among others, were all incorporated into high-level governmental spot posts. This was a time when bureaucrats turned historians and historians turned bureaucrats. One of the first steps the government took to ensure the intellectual monopoly of the new historical, linguistic, and racial theories was to close major cultural, social, and historical associations that were operating outside its purview. Once these potential rivals were neutralized, new associations were established under direct government control. The criterion for this institutional overhaul does not appear to be ideological. Even associations that spread regime friendly messages were shut down if they operated independently. A case in point is the Turkish Herths, Turk Otkalari, established as an Ottoman Turkist association in 1912. The Turkish Herths had already lost its autonomy in the Republican era and was an ardent supporter of the regime. Nonetheless, the Herths were forced by the government to abolish themselves in 1931. Several other independent associations faced the same fate and ended up under state control in that year, possibly in order to prevent the multiplicity of voices in matters relevant to the construction of Turkish identity. Two official institutions to lead the historical and linguistic mobilization, Turkish Historical Society and Turkish Linguistic Association, were established in 1931 and 1932, respectively, under slightly different names. Ataturk was extensively involved in the process of establishing both societies. According to the memoirs of one of the founders of the Turkish Historical Society, the society had its first meeting at Ataturk's dinner table even before its official assembly. Both associations played central roles in the formulation and dissemination of anthropometric claims. History and language worked in close cooperation in the formulation of an essentialized Turkish identity. In a speech in the Third Congress of Language in 1936, Afet İnan summarized the premises of the anthropometric mobilization and combined race, history, and language as follows. The Turkish history finds the Turkish race only with the help of positive scientific documents. The Turkish language is the most important one of these documents. One of the central concerns on the new regime was to produce textbooks that conformed to the Turco-centric worldview. The earliest official attempt, the central themes of Turkish history, materialized in 1930 out of the efforts of a committee whose participants were leading members of the Turkish Historical Society. Besides, only 2 of the 10 authors were members of the parliament, and one of the 2 ended up becoming a parliamentarian in 2 years. The fact that the book in question was published in a print run of only 100 copies indicates that it was intended as an internal document for the evaluation of the elite. Emerging after a rushed effort and lacking primary sources in its bibliography, the book did not receive an enthusiastic endorsement from the elites, including reportedly from Ataturk. Yet its narrative structure and claims became the central tenets of the new anthropometric efforts to find origins in a timeless past. In fact, the introductory parts of the book, together with a translation of a lecture by Leon Cahun, the French Orientalist whose ideas had a formative influence on Ottoman Turkism, was published separately in the same year. The central themes of Turkish history represents one of the earliest and most authoritative attempts to connect the Turkish identity to a timeless past and, in turn, to justify modernization efforts based on static racial essences. The book, in fact, starts by challenging and vowing to correct false perceptions about Turks and Turkish history. Then the authors summarize the main goals of the textbook in the brief preface. By correcting these mistakes, we would like to open the road that goes to the depths of our nation's creative capabilities, to uncover the secrets of Turkish genius and character, to show the specialty and strength of Turks to themselves, and to declare that our national progress is linked to deep racial roots. This brief statement signals some of the core issues with which Republican modernizers dealt. Uncovering Turkish essences hint at the underlying theme of the anthropomorphic agenda. Showing the strengths of Turks to themselves is an overacceptance of the positivist project and identifies one of the audiences for the racial, historical, and linguistic mobilization of the period, the local people. Of course, the other intended audience to be convinced of Turkish superiority is the West, indicated by invoking the tropes of false Western perceptions. Finally, the statement overtly links modernity to race, arguing that Turkey's modernization has to do with racial capabilities. The textbook covers only Turkish history and histories of other peoples who were considered relevant for Turks. After a 39-page introduction to the history of humanity, a short section on Introduction to Turkish History follows. The section on race classifies the Turkish race into white as opposed to black, yellow, and red in terms of appearance, and into brachycephalic as opposed to dolichocephalic in terms of craniometrical measurement. The text downplays the skull shape for the sake of the mind and intelligence, but it quickly mentions hereditary qualities of mental ability, possibly with the goal of linking essential Turkish qualities to modernity. The Turkish race, which created the greatest currents in history, is the race that maintained its identity the most. This race, too, mixed with other races in prehistoric and historical ages. Since the cultural characteristics of the Turkish race, which are the apparent achievements of its organic intelligence, have maintained their dominance in the majority of these admixtures. These mixings did not cause the Turkish race to lose its peculiarity. The rest of the book deals with ancient civilizations that the authors considered relevant for our race, which in most cases boiled down to crude attempts to establish linguistic and racial Turkishness of the civilization in question. These civilizations, in the order in which they were presented in the text, were China, India, Chaldea, Elam, Assyria, Egypt, Anatolia, the Aegean region, Greece, ancient Italy, Etruscans, and Iran. The book also included a 205-page section on ancient Turks in Central Asia, a 57-page section on the Ottoman history, and only a page-long section on the Turkish Republic. The treatment of the Ottoman Empire and the Islamic world takes place merely for proving the significance of Turkishness embedded within them. The history of the Ottomans became an opportunity for the authors to confirm putative differences between the Turks and other Islamic peoples, such as the Arabs. The Turks, they say, do not like disorder. They wish to provide order and security in their surroundings. Based on a picture of an Islamic world full of chaos and conflicts, the text draws a contrast a few sentences later. The Arabs and Iranians that comprise the Islamic world were very much enjoying endless quarrels. In fact, the impotence of Arabs and Iranians in organizing and managing the state, according to the authors, led to the domination of the Turks in the Islamic world. With the establishment of the Turkish Historical Society and the publication of the central themes, the Turkish historical thesis, Türk Tarihçesi, was slowly maturing into a format ready for popular dissemination. Working on details and sources proved time consuming, yet the main points of the thesis remained unchanged. Turks belong to the white race in its physiognomic and craniological aspects. The ancient homeland of the Turks is Central Asia. The Turks of Central Asia developed the oldest and most advanced civilization while other peoples were living in dark ages. Climatic changes forced the Turks of Central Asia to migrate to the west, carrying their civilization with them and civilizing others in the process. And several civilizations, including Mesopotamia, Sumerians and Hittites, among others, Greek Egyptian, as well as European cultures owe their existence to the civilizing effects of Turks. Despite encounters and mixtures with other peoples, Turks were always able to protect their essential characteristics and the purity of their identity and culture. Maps depicting Turkish migrations to other parts of the world served as visual reminders of in the footsteps of these central themes was a four-volume set of history. Published by the Society of History and authored by the Society of History and published in 1931. These four volumes covered, respectively, his prehistory, the Middle Ages, the near and contemporary periods, and the Turkish Republic. All right. The modernizing elite celebrated the publication of history as one of the greatest accomplishments of the Republic. For example, a book commemorating the 10th anniversary of the Republic compared Republican achievements with the Ottoman period by displaying a picture of the four volumes of history as a major achievement and visually contrasting it with the Ottoman script. A section of the page promoting the four-volume history textbook reads, Ottoman history, history of Islam, history of Arabs, etc. are episodes that are included in Turkish history only indirectly. The new Turkish history explains us to ourselves not according to how Europeans wish and benefit from, but according to how the historical reality shows. Therefore, the greatest characteristic of Turkish history, before anything else, is that it is scientific, quote unquote. These four volumes served as a model for all history and textbooks in the following 2 decades. Furthermore, the claims of the Turkish historical thesis that thus disseminated to school children secured a dogmatic position. Historical and linguistic arguments complemented each other in the textbooks because the authors of the new history thesis extended the idea of historical continuity to Turkish culture to language. The Turkish language, as the argument went, not only kept its essence throughout historical periods, but also influenced other languages. Historical research also reinforced the sense of continuity and the preservation of a timeless essence by a narrative chain of Turkish states, starting with ancient Turkish Huns in Central Asia and culminating with the Republic of Turkey. The names and number of Turkish states in history showed some variation, but the idea of a chain of states together with an emphasis on Turks' ability to form and maintain states remains a common theme in official Turkish historiography today. The circle of continuity regarding the essential qualities of Turks also was completed with the references to vague notions of race, usually intended to complement the right to exist as a nation. The new history tried to link Republican Turks to distant achievements with a usually confusing array of historical, linguistic, racial, and national messages. The efforts to erase the legacy of the terrible Turk took place so urgently and desperately that the scholarly mobilization for investigating racial essences used questionable methods. The search for anthropometric essences began with locating internationally recognized achievements and then proceeded to invent historical proof that the people accomplishing such a feat must be of Turkish origin. Because demonstrating the modernizing capacity of the Turks was a major deal, anthropometric research sought civilizational advances that were valued in modern standards. According to this logic, the first step was not to identify achievements of modern civilization and then to link these achievements to ancient Turks. For example, writing was a great gift to civilization. Therefore, Turks must have invented it. Metallurgy was the basis of modern industry. Therefore, it was important to show that Turks pioneered mining and metalwork. Women's suffrage was becoming an important movement in the West. In fact, women's inferior role in public life had given ammunition to Western critics of Turkey since the late Ottoman period. Therefore, ancient Turkish societies must have achieved complete equality between men and women. Popular participation in ancient Turkish societies, according to this narrative, resembled modern democracies, Yet they successfully avoided anarchy by never giving concessions from the tight enforcement of public order. This image of an orderly society operating under popular participation suited well to the autocratic tendencies on the regime. It justified right to government control while sustaining the rhetoric of popular participation. Islam in the West was perceived as an obstacle to progress. Therefore, it was important to show that the original religions of the Turks was totemism, shamanism, and animism. Islam was only a religion that came from outside. These statements functioned as pieces in a puzzle, constituting a larger whole while eliminating the effectiveness of counter statements. All these civilizational statements relied on a racial continuity of Turkishness, presenting Turks as essentially white and European. The anthropometric research, sorry, the anthropometric search for the Turkish essences, as it was in the case with biometric counterpart, developed as a critique of Western epistemic injustices. In the minds of Republican modernizers, respecting yearning for a sought after his Western modernity, always coupled with a deep resentment for the West. If one reason for this resentment was the perils of ultra modernity, the other was the perceived stubbornness of the West to relegate it. Turkey permanently to the status of traditional. Oh, sorry. It was. If one reason for the resentment was the perils of ultra modernity, the other was the perceived stubbornness of the West to relegate Turkey permanently to the status of traditional. Modernity for the reformers was not only a consequence of contemporary condition, but also an essential racialized characteristic embedded in one's collective identity. The former required the latter. Going to the West was only possible by going to the East, John Dewey observed that same year in his metaphorical understanding of the regime moving moving of the capital from Istanbul to Ankara in 1923. I shall try to preserve that feeling which came upon me in the first hours of seeing Ankara, that its selection as a capital and the will to build a center of government far away from the memories and traditions of Constantinople is a heroic venture, symbolizing faith in the possible ties. Sorry, symbolizing faith in the possibilities of the Asiatic peasant. It is paradoxical that it should be necessary for a nation to go into Asia in order to make sure that it is to be Europeanized. But the leader at least wish that Turkey be Europeanized in their own land, in their own way, and for their own benefit. Very, very interesting stuff here. I actually have to run. I got another class to get to. So I'll be back possibly later today to continue on reading with this book. We're going to blow through chapter 4 in the next section. We're going to leave off on what page is this? All right, page number 147. You can find this on page 147. Once again, if you need the hookup on books, holla at me. I'll be your dog. I got you. I support everybody to go buy the book. Is the Turk a White Man right here? And I'll be out here later. Y'all be easy. Peace.